There was a time when everyone loved R. Kelly, a man that was raised in the struggle, but then rose above his trauma to become a musical legend.
Y'all ready for a show? Will somebody make some noise?
Unfortunately, that's not where this story goes.
14 counts of child stemming from that infamous tape in which prosecutors say he stars.
Do you like teenage girls?
When you say teenage, how are we talking?
Is there truth to those allegations?
I mean, well, you know, he married Aaliyah.
Aaliyah was 15 at the time.
I'm R. Kelly and this is my life.
For decades, R. Kelly used his fame and power to manipulate, exploit, and silence his victims, operating in the shadows while the world cheered him on. His story is not just one of stardom gone wrong, it's a chilling examination of how power can corrupt, how fame can conceal, and how society itself can enable a predator to thrive in plain sight.
Did you ever fear for your life?
Yes.
You thought he might kill you?
Yeah.
Your kids?
No. But me, definitely.
I didn't do this stuff. This is not me. I'm fighting for my life.
I am not no demon, I'm no devil, I'm no criminal.
I'm R. Kelly and this is my life. This is my life. This is my life. I'm R. Kelly and this is my life.
Robert Sylvester Kelly, known to the world as R. Kelly, was born on January 8, 1967 in Chicago, Illinois. He grew up in the Ida B. Wells homes, a public housing project on the city's south side. Raised by his mother, Joanne Kelly, a devout Baptist and lead singer in the local church choir, Rob's early life was steeped in both music and hardship. His father was notably absent, leaving Joanne to raise Robert and his 3 siblings alone. From a young age, he was exposed to the soulful sounds of gospel music, attending church services where his mother sang passionately. This environment nurtured his musical talents, and by the age of 8, he was singing in the church choir. However, the streets of Chicago presented challenges that went beyond the typical struggles of urban life. In his autobiography, Solar Coaster: The Diary of Me, he revealed that he was sexually abused by a female family member, starting when he was around 8 years old. This abuse continued for several years, leaving deep psychological scars. Such early exposure to sexual trauma can have profound effects on a child's development, potentially distorting their understanding of relationships and boundaries. Rob's experiences were compounded by the violence and crime prevalent in his neighborhood. He often found himself in dangerous situations, including being shot in the shoulder by a stray bullet while riding his bike.
I've been shot, I've been stabbed, but I still, to this day, made it free. Out of the slums, out of the alleys, out of the deep, deep, deep dark.
These incidents contributed to a tumultuous childhood, marked by fear and instability. Despite these challenges, his musical talent provided a refuge. He attended Kenwood Academy, where his music teacher, Lena McLean, recognized his potential and encouraged him to try and pursue a career in music. Under her mentorship, Robert began to see music as a way out of his circumstances. However, the psychological impact of his early abuse and the absence of a father manifested in troubling ways. He developed a reputation for being withdrawn and struggled with illiteracy, which led to feelings of inadequacy and frustration. These internal conflicts would later shape his behavior, fostering a deep need for control and validation. As he grew older, he found solace in his growing musical talent, but also began to exhibit troubling tendencies. His inability to process his trauma in healthy ways created a contrast in his personality. On one side, the soulful artist crafting hits that would inspire millions, and on the other, a man struggling with insecurities and unresolved pain. His struggles with illiteracy, for example, made him feel powerless in a world that demanded competence. This inadequacy pushed him to channel his efforts into music, a field where he could dominate and exert control. Yet, his rise in the music world was shadowed by his inability to form healthy personal relationships.
Being able to see the person, Robert, the broken part of him, and then there's this persona who portrays this confident, in control man, which is the total opposite of what he is.
I just know that he has a problem with control. You know, I love my brother, you know, but he do have a problem.
This need for control, stemming from the loss of autonomy he experienced as a victim of abuse, would later become a key factor in his abusive behaviors. By his late teens, he began performing on street corners and in the subway stations of Chicago, attracting attention for his voice and ability to connect with an audience. However, those who knew him at the time described him as intensely private, even secretive about his personal life. This secrecy became another tool of control, allowing him to maintain an image that contrasted with the reality of his inner struggles. In retrospect, it becomes clear that Rob's childhood experiences, marked by neglect, trauma, and hardship, laid the foundation for a troubled adult life. His journey from a vulnerable boy to a man in a position of immense power would not heal the wounds of his past. Instead, it would magnify them, paving the way for the dark legacy that would come to define him. By the late 1980s, R. Kelly began gaining recognition for his musical talent. He joined a group called MGM, or Mentally Gifted Men, and competed on the television show Big Break, where they won $100,000 for their performance. This victory marked the beginning of Robert's career as a professional musician. But even as he entered the spotlight, cracks in his public image began to appear. Robert's reputation in the Chicago music scene was that of a prodigy, yet his personal life painted a more complex picture. He was fiercely ambitious, but his insecurities often led him to isolate himself from others or act out in controlling ways. During this period, he was described as someone who demanded perfection from those around him, often to the point of alienating collaborators. This need for control was not limited to his music. It extended to his personal relationships, even in their earliest stages. As he began to write and produce for other artists, he demonstrated an uncanny ability to craft hits, earning him a reputation as a musical genius. However, behind closed doors, his behavior became increasingly erratic. Those who worked with him would later describe a man who swayed between moments of charm and explosive anger. This duality, of being both charismatic and volatile, hinted at deeper psychological struggles. Robert's early conflicts can be understood through the lens of attachment theory. Having grown up without a stable father figure and experiencing abuse at a young age, he likely developed an insecure attachment style. This could explain his intense need for validation through external achievements, such as musical success, and his difficulty forming healthy personal relationships. Moreover, his perfectionism and controlling tendencies may have been rooted in his desire to overcome feelings of powerlessness from his childhood. His ability to dominate a room with his talent provided him with a sense of control, but this was a fragile defense mechanism. Whenever his authority or competence was questioned, he reacted with disproportionate anger, revealing deep-seated insecurities. Despite the acclaim and admiration pouring in from fans, those closest to him were beginning to see glimpses of a man whose internal demons were far from resolved. Despite the darkness that would come to define R. Kelly's life, there were moments where his softer side shone through, whether in his music, his philanthropy, or the ways he inspired millions through his artistry. To many, R. Kelly was not just a singer or songwriter, he was a voice of hope. Although his lyrics were predominantly sexual, they also conveyed themes of love, resilience, and self-belief, presenting an image of a man deeply in touch with his emotions and the struggles of those around him. One of R. Kelly's most iconic songs, I Believe I Can Fly, became an anthem of hope and perseverance. Released in 1996, the song resonated across generations, earning him 3 Grammy Awards and cementing his status as a cultural icon. For many, the song represented a deeply personal message, a testament to overcoming adversity and striving for greatness. Its universal appeal was undeniable, and it became a staple in everything from graduation ceremonies to church services. Kelly's connection to his community also seemed genuine at times. He often spoke about his roots in Chicago and gave back through various charitable initiatives. In 1984, he performed an emotional song at the funeral of Chicago basketball player Benji Wilson, who was his high school teammate.
It's so hard to say goodbye to yesterday.
Furthermore, R. Kelly's work in mentoring up-and-coming artists showcased an apparent desire to uplift others. He was known for his ability to recognize raw talent and nurture it into success. Artists like Aaliyah, who we'll later discuss, and Sparkle, again someone mixed up in Robert's controversy, credited him with helping launch their careers, highlighting his role as a mentor and collaborator. For these individuals, R. Kelly's belief in their potential provided them with opportunities they might have not otherwise had. However, even these moments of goodness were not without complexity. Critics have argued that Kelly's public acts of kindness often masked his private behavior, making it difficult to separate the man from his actions. While he presented himself as a generous figure, there were always whispers about his darker side, even in these seemingly positive contributions. From a psychological perspective, R. Kelly's softer side could be viewed as a reflection of his own yearning for redemption and validation. His music in particular allowed him to project an idealized version of himself, a man capable of inspiring and healing others. Yet, this projection may have also been a coping mechanism, allowing him to temporarily escape the inner turmoil that defined his private life. R. Kelly's softer moments served a manipulative purpose. His charm and generosity made it easier for him to gain the trust of those around him, especially young girls, which he later used to exert control. This duality, the kind mentor and the calculating abuser, would become a central theme in the stories told by those who knew him. These moments, however fleeting or complex, added depth to a man whose life would ultimately be defined by his contradictions. They revealed not just the capacity for good, but the ways in which that goodness could be overshadowed, or even weaponized, by his darker impulses. By the late 1990s, R. Kelly had solidified his position as one of the most successful R&B artists of his generation. His music was omnipresent, and his influence extended far beyond the genre. Yet, it was during this period of immense professional success that his personal life began unraveling in ways that would eventually come to light as deeply disturbing. The first major turning point came in 1994, when Kelly, then 27 years old, secretly married 15-year-old singer Aaliyah Horton.
Now, how is he to work with? Rob is great to work with, because really it's not like we work, because we're like really close, so it's like just fun really. We just hang out, sing.
I don't ever remember working.
Yeah, it's just like fun.
Aaliyah had been Kelly's protege, and the two had developed a professional relationship after he took her under his wing to produce her debut album, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. The album's title itself, in hindsight, became a chilling indication of Kelly's mindset, as the title track itself, which speaks about an underage girl desiring an older man, was actually written by R. Kelly. The marriage was revealed when a copy of the falsified marriage certificate leaked, showing that Aaliyah's age had been listed as 18 to bypass legal restrictions. When the scandal broke, the marriage was quickly annulled by Aaliyah's parents, and both Robert and Aaliyah avoided publicly addressing the incident in detail. However, this event marked a significant shift in public perception of R. Kelly. Psychologically, his relationship with Aaliyah can be viewed as the beginning of a pattern of exploitation and abuse of power. As an established artist, R. Kelly held significant authority and influence over Aaliyah, who was just beginning her career. This dynamic highlights a recurring theme in R. Kelly's behavior: his preference for targeting young and vulnerable individuals, often using his status and charm to manipulate them. In the years that followed, whispers about Kelly's inappropriate relationships with underage girls began to surface more frequently. Lawsuits were quietly settled, with accusers alleging misconduct, physical abuse, and coercion. One of the earliest known lawsuits came in 1996, when Tiffany Hawkins accused R. Kelly of initiating a sexual relationship with her when she was just 15 years old. Whilst Robert denied the allegations, the case was settled out of court for $250,000, a move that for many signaled an attempt to silence his accusers rather than address the claims. These incidents revealed a clear escalation in R. Kelly's behavior. While he had previously operated in secrecy, the growing number of accusations made it harder to hide his actions entirely. Nevertheless, his wealth, fame, and legal team enabled him to avoid serious consequences, reinforcing a dangerous belief that his status placed him above accountability. This period marks R. Kelly's descent into more severe and systematic criminal behavior. His earlier need for control and validation, rooted in his childhood trauma, had evolved into a dangerous cycle of preying on young girls. Robert appeared to derive power from targeting individuals who were young, impressionable, and dependent on him for their careers. This dynamic mirrors to the psychological concept of grooming, where predators use manipulation and trust building to exploit their victims. His actions during this time also suggest a level of cognitive dissonance, which explained simply is the mental discomfort or tension that arises when a person's beliefs, values, or attitudes conflict with their actions or new information. This then leads to them either changing their behavior or justifying it. While continuing to produce music that celebrated love and empowerment, his private life revealed a stark contradiction. This dissonance allowed R. Kelly to maintain his public image while justifying his abusive behavior to himself, a psychological defense mechanism that likely enabled him to avoid confronting the gravity of his actions. By the early 2000s, R. Kelly's behavior reached new extremes. A videotape surfaced, allegedly showing him engaging in sexual acts with a 14-year-old girl. The video, which became widely circulated, led to his indictment on multiple counts of child pornography in 2002. Despite overwhelming evidence, Kelly maintained his innocence, and the case dragged on for years, with his legal team working tirelessly to discredit witnesses and delay proceedings. The tape was a turning point, exposing Kelly's behavior to the world in a way that could no longer be ignored. For many, it was the first undeniable proof of his predatory tendencies. Yet despite the outrage, R. Kelly's musical career remained largely intact during this time, as he continued to release music and perform to sold-out crowds. It's here that the cracks in his facade began to widen, revealing a man whose public persona as a musical genius was conflicting with the darkness of his private actions. As R. Kelly's behavior became more widely known, attempts to hold him accountable for his actions began to take shape. However, these efforts often fell short due to a combination of systemic failures, legal maneuvering, and public denial of the severity of his crimes. Despite mounting accusations, Robert evaded significant consequences for decades, further encouraging his predatory behavior. By the late 1990s, Robert was facing multiple lawsuits alleging sexual misconduct and abuse. These cases, however, rarely made it to trial. Instead, Robert and his legal team relied on out-of-court settlements to silence accusers and avoid public scrutiny. For example, the Tiffany Hawkins lawsuit in 1996. These settlements created a pattern that likely allowed Kelly to avoid accountability while discouraging other potential accusers from coming forward. The financial agreements often included non-disclosure clauses, preventing victims from speaking publicly about their experiences. This strategy, combined with Robert's immense resources and influence, rendered attempts at retribution ineffective. The 21-count indictment for child pornography after the videotape captured national attention, sparking public outrage and calls for justice. But despite the shocking nature of the evidence, the trial was delayed for 6 years, allowing R. Kelly to continue his music career relatively unscathed. His legal team argued that the identity of the girl in the video could not be confirmed, while the victim and her family denied it was her, likely due to pressure and fear of public exposure. R. Kelly's acquittal in 2008, after a 6-week trial, was a devastating blow to those seeking justice. The verdict highlighted flaws in the judicial process, including the difficulty of securing convictions in cases involving high-profile defendants. For R. Kelly, the acquittal reinforced his belief that he was untouchable, allowing him to continue his abusive behavior without fear of consequences. Part of what allowed Robert to escape accountability for so long was the public's willingness to separate his art from his actions. Despite numerous allegations, R. Kelly's fans continued to support him, attending his concerts and purchasing his music. Songs like Ignition and Bump and Grind became cultural hits, overshadowing the accusations against him. Even when I watch recent videos on R. Kelly's controversy, there's still hundreds of aunties talking about his God-given voice and talent, whilst ignoring the allegations. Celebrity culture also played a role in shielding R. Kelly from criticism. Many in the entertainment industry remained silent about his behavior, unwilling to jeopardize their own careers by speaking out. Others defended him, framing the allegations as attempts to tarnish a successful black artist. This narrative resonated with some fans, who viewed the accusations as a racially motivated attack, further complicating efforts to hold him accountable. The release of the Surviving R. Kelly documentary series marked a significant shift in public perception. The series, which featured interviews with survivors, journalists, and former collaborators, shed light on the extent of R. Kelly's abuse and the systems that enabled it. For many viewers, it was the first time they fully grasped the scope of his crimes. The documentary sparked renewed calls for justice, leading to multiple investigations and charges against Kelly in both federal and state courts. It also reignited public conversations about the failures of the music industry, law enforcement, and society at large to protect vulnerable individuals from predators like R. Kelly. Robert's ability to avoid accountability for so long can be partially explained by his manipulative tendencies and psychological profile. As a master manipulator, he created an environment of fear and loyalty amongst his victims, discouraging them from speaking out. He also used his charm and public persona to deflect criticism, portraying himself as a misunderstood genius rather than a predator. Additionally, the systemic failures of the justice system and societal biases played a crucial role. R. Kelly's fame, wealth, and race intersected in ways that made it difficult for his victims, many of whom were young black women from disempowered backgrounds, to be believed and supported. This failure reflects broader issues of how society values certain victims less than others, allowing predators like Kelly to operate with exemption from punishment. By the time R. Kelly's predatory behavior became widely known, the extent of his crimes revealed an appalling pattern of abuse, control, and exploitation spanning decades. These acts, concealed for years by his fame, wealth, and influence, constituted some of the most severe abuses of power ever uncovered in the music industry. R. Kelly systematically preyed on vulnerable young women and girls, often using his celebrity status to groom them. Many survivors recounted being approached at concerts, malls, and even high schools by members of Kelly's entourage, who would pass along his contact information or invite them to exclusive events. These methods revealed a calculated approach to identifying and isolating victims, many of whom were minors. Kelly often framed himself as a mentor or promoter, promising young girls opportunities in the music industry. These promises, however, were little more than bait, designed to lure his victims into a web of control and abuse. Survivors described how Robert's charm and initial kindness was used to hide his darker intentions, allowing him to manipulate them into trusting him. One of the most disturbing revelations about R. Kelly's crimes involved allegations that he was running a sex cult in which women, often underage, were held against their will.
Why would these women say the same thing about you? That you are controlling, that you are abusive, that you tell women when to eat, when to go to the bathroom, when they can sleep, where they can dress. Why would all these women tell these different stories about you if they were not true? And they don't know each other.
Multiple survivors reported being confined to Kelly's properties, where they were subjected to strict rules and constant surveillance. These women were isolated from their families, forbidden from speaking to anyone without Kelly's permission, and required to follow his every command. Punishments for disobedience ranged from verbal abuse to physical violence, further cementing R. Kelly's control over them.
He tied my arms behind my back, and he tied my legs and my hands and arms together, and he fell asleep with me on the side of the bed like an animal.
Some survivors described being forced to recruit other young women, perpetuating the cycle of abuse. Perhaps the most heinous aspect of Kelly's crimes was his sexual abuse of minors. Survivors revealed how Kelly would groom young girls, beginning with seemingly innocent gestures of mentorship before escalating to sexual exploitation. The infamous videotape which surfaced in 2002, the one with the 14-year-old girl, was just one example of his predatory behavior. Over the years, numerous survivors came forward with similar stories, describing how Kelly exploited their youth and innocence. Federal prosecutors later revealed that R. Kelly created and distributed child, documenting his abuse as both a form of control and personal gratification. These tapes became key evidence in the charges brought against him, exposing the extent of his predatory behavior. Kelly's control over his victims went beyond physical abuse. It extended to psychological manipulation. Survivors described being confined to small rooms for days, denied basic necessities like food and water, and subjected to degrading acts. Kelly's tactics included both physical isolation and emotional dependency, leaving his victims feeling powerless to escape.
She also claimed Kelly got her pregnant twice, and she got an abortion both times. She wrote, "It's scary having your first child and aborting them because of some monster that kept me as a prisoner."
One particularly chilling method of control involved Kelly filming his sexual encounters without consent. He used these recordings as blackmail, threatening to release the footage if his victims attempted to leave or expose him. This further silenced his victims, reinforcing his control over their lives. The trauma experienced by Kelly's victims was profound and long-lasting. Many survivors described feelings of shame, fear, and helplessness, compounded by the public nature of their abuse. Some struggled with mental health issues such as depression, PTSD, and anxiety, while others faced disbelief and backlash when they attempted to speak out. The failures of society that allowed Kelly to continue his abuse for so long added to the survivors' suffering. Despite the growing number of allegations, R. Kelly's fame and wealth shielded him from accountability for years, leaving his victims to feel unheard and unsupported. Robert's crimes were not just about the abuse of individuals, they also revealed the dark underbelly of celebrity culture and systemic enablers. His inner circle, including managers, assistants, and bodyguards, played a role in facilitating and concealing his behavior. The music industry's silence and complicity further enabled Kelly to maintain his power, even as allegations mounted. His actions destroyed countless lives, exposing a deeply ingrained culture of complicity that allowed a predator to operate for decades. For his victims, the scars of R. Kelly's abuse will likely last a lifetime. Their stories, however, serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of believing survivors and holding perpetrators accountable, no matter how famous or powerful they may be. R. Kelly's legacy, once defined by his music, is now irreversible, tarnished by the depth of his crimes. The downfall of R. Kelly was long overdue, but when it came, it was decisive. After years of avoiding accountability through legal maneuvering and systemic failures, the weight of his actions finally caught up to him. The stories of his victims, amplified by investigative journaling and the surviving R. Kelly documentary series, ignited a cultural reckoning that could no longer be ignored. In July 2019, R. Kelly was arrested on federal charges of trafficking, child and the obstruction of justice. These charges were far more comprehensive than previous cases, reflecting the full extent of his crimes. Unlike his 2008 trial, where he was acquitted due to a lack of cooperation from the victim, the new charges were supported by multiple survivors willing to testify, as well as corroborating evidence from videos and other materials seized by investigators. The trials revealed disturbing details about R. Kelly's operations. Federal prosecutors described how he and his inner circle ran a criminal enterprise designed to recruit, groom, and exploit young women and girls. Witnesses testified about Robert's abusive behavior, including confinement, physical violence, and psychological manipulation. In September 2021, R. Kelly was convicted on multiple counts, including racketeering and violation of the Mann Act, which prohibits transporting individuals across state lines for illicit purposes. He was later sentenced to 30 years in prison, marking a significant moment of accountability for both Robert Kelly and the systems that enabled him. His conviction sent shockwaves through the music industry and society at large. For decades, he had been protected by his celebrity status, loyal fans, and an industry that prioritized profit over ethics. His downfall forced many to confront uncomfortable questions about complicity, from the role of his enablers to the public's willingness to overlook allegations for the sake of his music. Kelly's case became a high-profile example of how cultural attitudes were shifting as more survivors felt empowered to come forward and demand justice. The story of R. Kelly is a grim study in the intersection of power, trauma, and unchecked behavior. From a psychological perspective, his actions can be traced back to his own childhood experiences, marked by abuse, neglect, and feelings of inadequacy. However, these experiences do not excuse his behavior. Instead, they highlight how unresolved trauma, when combined with power and privilege, can lead to devastating consequences. Kelly's need for control and dominance over his victims likely stemmed from a deep-seated sense of insecurity and a desire to reclaim the power he felt was taken from him during his childhood abuse. His ability to manipulate and exploit others also points to traits associated with narcissistic and sociopathic tendencies, where empathy is replaced by a need for validation and control. The case of R. Kelly serves as a reminder of the importance of holding powerful individuals accountable, regardless of their celebrity status. It also reveals the systemic failures that allowed his abuse to continue unchecked for decades. These failures include not only the legal and justice systems, but also the societal tendency to dismiss or discredit survivors, particularly when they're young women of color. For his victims, R. Kelly's conviction may bring some measure of closure, but it cannot undo the harm he inflicted. Their courage in coming forward, despite the risks and public scrutiny, stands as a testament to resilience and the pursuit of justice. R. Kelly's story ends not with his music, but with his crimes, his victims, and his imprisonment. His legacy, once defined by iconic songs and cultural influence, is now indefinitely tied to the lives he destroyed. As he serves his sentence, the world is left to grapple with the broader implications of his actions, the systems that failed, the survivors who persevered, and the lessons we must learn to prevent such abuses in the future. Ultimately, R. Kelly's story is not just about a man who fell from grace. It's about the courage of those who stood up to him, the reckoning of an industry that allowed his behavior, and the power of truth to dismantle even the most fortified facades.